Okay, here we are again with the 1855. This is Bill Coe, and I'm interviewing today, sir,
I'm Mark Lewis.
Mark Lewis. And Mark is works with Jackson County, Missouri here at 1855 Museum. You can come visit Mark anytime, but because he's a great guy and you're just learning a lot from him. Mark, we were talking about, actually, I'm a fascinated this planter right here, and we were talking about agricultural production. And what were some of the crops in Missouri back then?
So for the typical farmer, we're mostly going to grow corn. Corn is used to, you can eat it yourself, but it also maintains our livestock, which we eat. So we got to have a lot of that during the wintertime to keep the livestock alive, keep them fat and healthy. We mostly eat hogs, and hogs in the wintertime need a lot of corn, so we pack them up and eat those. The money crops, and some people would have enough corn to sell corn,
Okay.
but mostly it's for their own family.
Okay.
The money crops, and there was some people who were very successful in Missouri growing hemp and tobacco.
Okay.
And that's mostly going to be, and Jackson County would count as one, but the counties along the Missouri River, and then north of St. Louis, the Mississippi River. So that's pretty much where all the hemp and tobacco is grown.
Well, now, so Mark, okay, so from like a slavery perspective in 1855 and maybe pre-1855, slaves that were indentured, let's say to a farmer particularly, those would be the crops that they would have to, those are labor-intensive crops.
Very labor-intensive crops.
Really,
so
really.
That's the primary. Missouri was about 9% slave.
Okay.
And the extreme majority of those were in those counties along the Missouri River.
Okay.
And north of St. Louis along the Mississippi.
Okay, and that's just because the Mississippi Delta, the soil was just so fertile and rich.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, on the Boot Hill end of the Mississippi, they actually were growing cotton.
Wow.
Right.
Okay. See, a lot of people didn't know that Missouri had cotton production back then and there. But primarily, you said the hemp was used for ropes.
Making ropes.
From ropes, and that
so
was shift.
The South,
Okay.
they were overproducing cotton, and
Right.
they baled cotton with rope.
Right.
And so Kentucky and Missouri were actually the only states that grew hemp. And
Wow.
They grew a lot of it and sold it for a lot of money to make it. Well, they sold the rope.
Right.
So that in the South they could bale the cotton and ship that wherever.
Wow. Wow. Now, we've done some research about tobacco, particularly in South Carolina being the capital and all that type of production.
Yeah.
How did Missouri compete very well with tobacco, being kind of a Midwestern state, if you will? I mean, obviously down the Mississippi, so that was grown and then shipped down south, like Louisiana area?
So I don't know, honestly, how well we competed.
Right.
I'm going to share a story from Mark Twain.
Okay.
He was born and raised in Missouri,
Uh-huh.
and he grew up smoking Missouri tobacco.
Okay.
So, but he goes to Hartford, Connecticut, and lives his adult life.
Uh-huh.
And in Hartford, he would entertain a lot of influential people.
Uh-huh.
Politicians, other artists, and whatnot. And they frequently got onto him because he would like to share, hey, let's have a cigar. He loved cigars.
Uh-huh.
But he would always get his cigars shipped from Missouri, and they were like, that's not good. It's not the tobacco we're accustomed to.
Right, right.
But if you were from Missouri and that's all you ever knew.
That's all you grew. Right. Okay. All right. Well, see, I didn't know. I mean, I just learned about tobacco being grown in Missouri. I didn't think our climate was sustainable enough to do that. But now,
well, we've grown it here.
Oh, really? Okay.
And my own personal experience is it's awful just because if you're not out there every day picking off this big old worm, they'll eat it up fast.
Wow.
And and I don't know what kind of, it's a caterpillar actually, but I don't know.
Right.
It makes some kind of moth, and they just eat that tobacco right up.
Well, and thank you. And if you can, let's talk a little bit more about slavery. I mean, in Missouri versus Kansas kind of coming in as a slave state, how much, Mark, would you say slave labor contributed to the success of these farms? Would it be, just a couple, like 10% or 50%, 70%? What would you think?
And we had a lot of our economy was thanks to the Santa Fe Trail trade.
Okay.
So there's a lot of merchants that are doing quite well in the Santa Fe Trail trade. But outside of the merchants, the wealthiest farmers were all using slaves.
Okay.
And they were in fact, I mean, the area between Lexington, Missouri, well, along the Missouri, Lexington was called the capital of Little Dixie.
Wow. Wow.
And they were very successful.
Right. Now, these weren't like the traditional slavery plantations that you would see.
Yes.
Oh, these mimic the ones
Oh, absolutely.
in down south. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
They called it Little Dixie.
Wow. Wow. I know historically Missouri was kind of ravaged by slave patrols that would, slaves that would be trying to come escape,
Yeah.
and would come up, through, or try to get to Kansas, if you will,
Right.
and
Not a lot of knowledge of that. And
Right.
of course, so for us, Kansas is a brand new thing,
right,
and it's when we start Missouri Town 1855 in 1964. It's the middle of the Civil Rights Movement, and
okay.
you're a Jackson County politician. You're trying to avoid controversy,
right,
and so they wish they would have chose, say, Missouri Town 1850,
right,
because in 1855, because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, that time in our history called Bleeding Kansas is just kicking off.
right.
And in fact, in November it starts to get kind of ugly.
Yeah, and that's what was you communicated in the last video, that the Civil War actually started well before the actual conflict,
Right.
and it started with the 1855 era, and that type of tension that rose up, and then the emergence of Kansas and Nebraska coming into the being recognized as states. And Mark, you made a great point that Kansas at that time was considered what?
Well, prior to 1854,
Prior to 1855?
it was Indian Territory.
Indian Territory.
Yeah, Nebraska and Kansas and Oklahoma were all called Indian Territory.
Wow. Wow. And so, and then you also made a great point earlier. I want to capture this for our video. You were talking about Missouri that was it as far as development. I mean, this was as far as west as people went.
Well,
at
like
that
this building is from 1820,
Mhm.
and when it was built, that was it. It was, I mean, they were among the first people in the neighborhood,
Mhm.
and there wasn't much else.
Right. And so going west was not really.
Well, you were technically illegal.
Wow.
It was Indian Territory.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So you've heard of the Oklahoma Sooners.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't legal. They left early.
Wow.
If you were in Indian Territory, across here, and don't get me wrong, there were European white folks,
Uh-huh.
but they were there either as government, like Fort Leavenworth
Okay.
was there, the Shawnee Indian Mission. So they were mostly missionaries,
Okay.
trying to teach Christianity to the natives.
Wow. Wow.
In fact, even in 1856, there's a lot of Indians in, say, what we would call Johnson County.
Okay.
So imagine Johnson County.
That is-
There's a lot of Indians. But
Wow.
they're- except for a couple of very small tribes, they're reservation Indians.
Right.
And
Right.
they had grown, or they had been moved from the East Coast, from Ohio River Valley, and they were very much acclimated to living in the white way of life.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for your time today. This has been an awesome educational experience, and I just wanted to thank you for your time and your insight of what 1855 looked like.
Well, we like to
Because
share that.
yeah, and I encourage people to come out here and get a great experience in understanding how agriculture played a role in our country and in today's society.
Yeah.
So hats off to you, Mark.
Well,
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye.